Imagine a practice so ancient it stretches back to the dawn of civilization, a sacred ritual tied to faith, identity, and even divine promise. Now imagine that same practice seen by others as an unnecessary violation of personal freedom, performed without consent on millions around the world. This is the story of circumcision, a tradition that sparked debate, controversy, and devotion for thousands of years. But here's the question: does it still have a place in our modern world? Or is it time to leave this ancient ritual in the past? In today's video, we'll uncover the complex truth behind circumcision, exploring its origins, its evolving meaning, and the ethical storm that surrounds it today. Stick with us, because by the end, you might find yourself questioning everything you thought you knew about this age-old practice. Let's dive in. For some, circumcision is a sacred obligation, an unbreakable covenant with God that stretches back to the dawn of civilization. For others, it's a violation of human rights, a procedure performed on individuals who can't consent, a relic of the past that we need to leave behind. Which side are you on? What if I told you that this simple ritual is at the center of debates about religious freedom, bodily autonomy, and even medical profiteering? And what if we told you that some people are pushing for laws to ban circumcision altogether? In this video, we'll uncover the shocking truth behind circumcision, its history, its ethics, and whether it's time to reconsider this ancient practice. Stick around, because by the end of this, you might just be questioning everything you thought you knew about circumcision. Is circumcision a sacred rite worth preserving, or a violation of personal freedom that needs to be stopped? Let's get the conversation going. Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and let's dive into the debate that no one wants to talk about, but everyone should. Let's begin by going back to where it all started: Abraham's covenant with God as described in the Bible. The story of Abraham's covenant with God. The story of circumcision as a sign of the covenant begins in the book of Genesis, chapter 17. God appears to Abraham when he is 99 years old with a life-changing promise. God tells Abraham, "I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make nations of you, and kings shall come from you." But this wasn't just a promise of prosperity and descendants. It was a profound, binding covenant between Abraham and God, which was meant to last through his lineage for all generations. As part of the covenant, God commanded Abraham and his male descendants to perform circumcision. This ritual of removing the foreskin of male infants or adult converts was to serve as a physical sign of their relationship with God, marking them as chosen and devoted. In Genesis 17:10-14, God explicitly states, "This is my covenant with you and your descendants after you, the covenant you are to keep. Every male among you shall be circumcised. You are to undergo circumcision, and it will be the sign of the covenant between me and you. For the generations to come, every male among you who is 8 days old must be circumcised." This wasn't just an arbitrary ritual. Circumcision became the mark of identity, a sign that God would bless Abraham and his descendants, and that they, in turn, would be bound to live under his laws. Failure to undergo circumcision meant being cut off from God's people, breaking the covenant. Now think about this for a second. Why do you think God chose such a personal and physical sign for this covenant? Was it a test of faith, obedience, or something more? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'm curious to hear your interpretations. Symbolism of circumcision in the covenant. First, circumcision was an act of faith and obedience. Abraham's willingness to follow God's command without question showed his absolute trust in God's promises. Remember, Abraham wasn't just asked to circumcise his future descendants. He and every male in his household, including his son Ishmael, were circumcised immediately after receiving the covenant. Even at 99 years old, Abraham followed through, demonstrating unwavering faith. But circumcision also represented purity and commitment. Just as the foreskin was removed from the male body, the act symbolized the cutting away of impurities and sins from one's heart and spirit. It was a metaphor for spiritual cleansing, signifying a life set apart for God. Circumcision further became a marker of identity. For the descendants of Abraham, this physical sign was a constant reminder of their unique relationship with God, a covenant that distinguished them from other nations. It was a visible testament to their heritage, their faith, and the promises God made to their forefather. Do you think such a physical sign of faith would have the same meaning today? In a world where faith is often more internalized or spiritual, would having such a physical act still hold the same weight for believers? I'd love to hear your take on this in the comments. How circumcision is viewed in modern times. Fast forward to today, and circumcision is still widely practiced, but its meaning and significance vary depending on religious, cultural, and even medical perspectives. Let's break down how it's viewed across different faiths and contexts. Circumcision in Christianity. The Christian perspective on circumcision has shifted significantly since the days of the early church. In the New Testament, particularly in the writings of the Apostle Paul, we see that circumcision was no longer required for followers of Christ. This was a major point of debate in the early church, as many of the first Christians were Jewish, and circumcision was seen as an essential part of their identity. However, Paul argued that faith in Jesus Christ and spiritual transformation were more important than physical rituals. In his letter to the Romans, Paul explains that circumcision is of the heart, by the Spirit, not by the letter. Romans 2:29. Similarly, in Galatians 5:6, Paul emphasizes that neither circumcision nor uncircumcision means anything. What counts is faith expressing itself through love. For Christians, this marked a shift from physical acts to spiritual ones. Baptism, for example, became the new ritual of entry into the Christian faith, symbolizing purification and rebirth. Today, circumcision among Christians is mostly a cultural or medical choice rather than a religious one. Some Christian denominations may practice it, but it's generally not seen as a requirement for salvation or faith. Do you think religious leaders should adapt ancient practices like circumcision to modern ethical standards? Or is it disrespectful to challenge sacred traditions? Health and medical perspectives on circumcision. In addition to its religious significance, circumcision has become widely discussed in the context of health and hygiene. Modern medical research highlights several potential health benefits of circumcision, including a reduced risk of urinary tract infections, UTIs, sexually transmitted infections, STIs, and even certain types of cancer. This has made circumcision a common medical practice, especially in countries like the United States, where it is often performed for health reasons rather than religious ones. Several global health organizations, including the World Health Organization, WHO, have endorsed circumcision in specific contexts, particularly for its role in reducing the transmission of HIV in regions with high rates of infection. This has led to circumcision campaigns in parts of Africa, where the procedure is encouraged as part of HIV prevention strategies. But despite these medical endorsements, circumcision remains a highly debated topic. Critics argue that circumcision, particularly when performed on infants, raises ethical concerns related to bodily autonomy and informed consent. They believe that individuals should have the right to make decisions about their own bodies when they are old enough to do so. In some countries, movements against routine infant circumcision have gained momentum, questioning whether the potential health benefits outweigh the ethical issues surrounding consent. These movements often argue for intactivism, advocating for a child's right to bodily integrity and autonomy until they can decide for themselves. So here's a question for you. Do you think circumcision should be a personal decision made later in life, or should parents continue to make this decision for their children based on religious, cultural, or health reasons? I'd love to hear your perspectives on this topic. Let's discuss it in the comments. Cultural and ethical debates on circumcision. While circumcision is deeply rooted in religious traditions, its practice today is often at the crossroads of culture, ethics, and personal choice. In some cultures, circumcision is performed for reasons that go beyond religious or medical concerns. It can be a rite of passage into adulthood, a marker of identity, or even a societal expectation. However, the growing awareness of personal rights and bodily autonomy has led to more widespread debate about the ethics of circumcision. Should an irreversible procedure be performed on individuals before they are able to consent? This question has become particularly relevant in secular societies, where circumcision is often viewed more as a cultural or cosmetic choice rather than a religious mandate. In several countries, there have been legal challenges to routine infant circumcision. Some groups argue that circumcision without medical necessity is a violation of human rights, and they call for laws that protect children from unnecessary bodily alterations. Others defend the practice on the grounds of parental rights, religious freedom, and cultural tradition. In countries like Germany and Sweden, debates over the legality of religious circumcision have led to public discourse on how to balance religious practices with modern ethical standards. While these debates have not led to outright bans in most countries, they have sparked important conversations about the rights of parents versus the rights of children, and how to navigate such delicate issues in multicultural societies. What do you think about this ethical debate? Should cultural and religious traditions take precedence, or should the rights of the individual, even as a child, come first? This is a complex issue, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Let's start a respectful discussion on where we draw the line between tradition and autonomy. Should circumcision be considered a violation of human rights, similar to how the world views other body-altering practices like FGM? Where do we draw the line between tradition and consent? Circumcision in Christianity, a shift from physical to spiritual. As we discussed earlier, Christianity took a different approach to circumcision, especially after the life and teachings of Jesus Christ. The New Testament reflects a major shift from the physical ritual of circumcision to a more spiritual interpretation of faith and salvation. For early Christians, this was a significant turning point in how they understood their relationship with God. In the early days of the Christian church, there was an ongoing debate about whether Gentile converts to Christianity needed to be circumcised to fully join the community of believers. This debate was addressed at the Council of Jerusalem, Acts 15, where the apostles, including Peter and Paul, ultimately decided that circumcision was not necessary for salvation. Instead, they emphasized that faith in Jesus Christ, repentance, and baptism were the true signs of being part of the Christian faith. The Apostle Paul was particularly vocal about this issue. In his letter to the Galatians, Galatians 5:6, Paul writes, "For in Christ Jesus neither circumcision nor uncircumcision counts for anything, but only faith working through love." Paul argued that the circumcision of the heart, a spiritual transformation, was far more important than the physical act of circumcision. This shift allowed Christianity to move beyond its Jewish roots and become more accessible to Gentiles, who were not bound by Jewish law. Circumcision was no longer seen as a requirement for belonging to God's people. Instead, baptism became the primary initiation ritual for Christians, symbolizing purification, rebirth, and entrance into the Christian community. In modern Christianity, circumcision is largely a cultural or medical decision rather than a religious one. Most Christian denominations do not require it, though some Christian parents choose to circumcise their sons for cultural reasons or because of health considerations. What do you think about this transition from physical to spiritual rituals in Christianity? Does it represent an evolution of faith? Or do you think something was lost in moving away from the ancient practice? Let's explore this fascinating shift in religious practice together. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Circumcision as a personal and cultural choice in modern Christianity. As Christianity evolved over time, the physical act of circumcision became less central to religious identity and more of a personal or cultural choice for Christians. Today, many Christian parents still choose to circumcise their sons, but this decision is often influenced by cultural norms, family traditions, or medical advice rather than religious doctrine. For example, in countries like the United States, where circumcision has been widely practiced for health reasons, many Christian families may opt for circumcision as part of a routine newborn procedure. However, in other parts of the world, such as Europe, circumcision rates among Christians are much lower, as it is viewed more as a cultural or medical procedure rather than a religious one. Interestingly, the Catholic Church and many Protestant denominations have no specific teachings on circumcision, allowing parents to make the decision based on personal beliefs and cultural context. As mentioned earlier, the Apostle Paul's writings heavily influenced this shift, particularly his emphasis on faith in Jesus Christ as the key to salvation rather than adherence to Jewish laws like circumcision. This raises a thought-provoking question. Should religious communities maintain practices from ancient times, or should they adapt to modern cultural and ethical standards? How do you think faith-based decisions around circumcision have evolved? And what role should tradition play in today's world? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Bodily autonomy and the intactivist movement. In recent years, the conversation around circumcision has expanded beyond religious and cultural contexts to include discussions about ethics, bodily autonomy, and human rights. As awareness of personal freedoms grows, some individuals and organizations have started advocating against routine infant circumcision. This movement is commonly referred to as the intactivist movement, and its proponents argue that circumcision should not be performed on individuals who cannot consent to the procedure, such as newborns and young children. The primary argument of intactivists is that circumcision is a permanent and irreversible procedure, and individuals should have the right to make decisions about their own bodies when they are old enough to understand the risks and benefits. They contend that circumcision, when done without medical necessity, violates a child's bodily integrity and autonomy. Why do you think society condemns female genital mutilation, but largely accepts male circumcision? Shouldn't all forms of non-consensual body modification be viewed the same way? In contrast, those who support routine circumcision, whether for religious, cultural, or health reasons, argue that parents have the right to make medical decisions on behalf of their children, just as they do for vaccinations or other medical interventions. For religious families, circumcision is often seen as an essential part of their faith and cultural identity, and delaying it until a child is old enough to choose could mean missing out on important religious milestones. In some countries, such as Denmark and Iceland, debates about banning non-medical circumcision have sparked intense public discussions about how to balance religious freedom with individual rights. While no country has outright banned circumcision, these debates highlight the growing tension between tradition and modern views on human rights. What do you think? Should circumcision be a personal decision made later in life? Or is it a parent's right to make this choice for their children, especially in religious contexts? Let's explore this topic together in the comments. There are so many viewpoints to consider, and your perspective is invaluable. Circumcision as a rite of passage in various cultures. Beyond the religious and ethical debates, circumcision also plays a significant role as a rite of passage in many cultures around the world. For example, in certain African and Pacific Islander cultures, circumcision is performed as part of initiation ceremonies that mark the transition from boyhood to manhood. These rituals often include elaborate ceremonies, songs, dances, and community involvement, making circumcision a deeply meaningful event that goes beyond physical transformation. In these cultures, circumcision is seen as a way to affirm one's identity and status within the community. It signifies maturity, responsibility, and readiness to take on adult roles. For example, in some African tribes, circumcision is part of an initiation process that also includes teachings about adult responsibilities, morality, and tribal history. The ceremony can be a collective experience, with groups of boys undergoing circumcision together as they bond over their shared rite of passage. In other cultures, circumcision may also be linked to fertility and marriage rites, where it is believed to enhance the man's suitability for marriage or ensure his fertility. While these cultural practices are deeply respected and often celebrated, they can also be subject to the same ethical debates we've discussed earlier, especially when circumcision is performed on children who cannot consent. What do you think of circumcision as a rite of passage? Do you think these cultural practices should be preserved, or should modern ethical standards take precedence? I'd love to hear your thoughts. This is a topic that evokes strong opinions, and it's important to consider all perspectives. The medicalization of circumcision, health benefits, and risks. Now let's shift gears a bit and dive into the medical perspective on circumcision. As mentioned earlier, circumcision is often performed for health reasons, particularly in regions where certain infections and diseases are prevalent. Modern medical research suggests that circumcision can have several potential health benefits, which has led to its widespread practice in countries like the United States and as part of public health campaigns in parts of Africa. Health benefits of circumcision. Some of the most frequently cited health benefits of circumcision include 1. Reduced risk of urinary tract infections, UTIs. Circumcised males are less likely to develop UTIs, particularly in infancy. 2. Lower risk of sexually transmitted infections, STIs. Research has shown that circumcision may reduce the risk of contracting STIs, including HIV. This has led to circumcision being recommended as part of HIV prevention strategies in certain parts of Africa. 3. Prevention of penile cancer. Although rare, circumcision has been associated with a reduced risk of developing penile cancer. 4. Improved hygiene. Circumcision can make it easier to maintain proper genital hygiene, which may reduce the risk of infections or irritations caused by poor hygiene. Risks and ethical concerns. While circumcision can offer health benefits, it is not without risks. Like any surgical procedure, circumcision carries the possibility of complications, including infection, bleeding, and in rare cases, more severe complications. These risks are generally low when circumcision is performed by trained professionals in a medical setting, but they can be higher in non-medical or unsanitary conditions. Is circumcision still relevant in modern society, or is it simply an outdated practice with no place in today's world? Should we abandon it altogether? In addition to medical risks, there are ongoing ethical concerns about performing circumcision on infants who cannot consent. Some argue that unless there is a clear medical necessity, the potential risks do not justify performing the procedure on a child who has no say in the matter. Others, however, point out that many medical decisions are made on behalf of children, and circumcision is just one of many choices parents make in the best interest of their child's health. This raises an important question. Do you think the medical benefits of circumcision justify performing the procedure on infants? Or should it be left until individuals can make their own informed decision? Let's discuss this in the comments. There's a lot to unpack here, and your opinion matters. Cultural norms and the medicalization of circumcision. While the medical benefits of circumcision have certainly become more prominent in discussions today, the cultural impact cannot be understated. In countries where circumcision is common, like the United States, it's often considered a routine part of childbirth for male infants, with many parents choosing circumcision out of cultural expectations rather than strictly religious or medical reasons. For generations, circumcision has been performed in the U.S. as a common procedure, largely driven by beliefs about cleanliness, health, and societal norms. Many parents see circumcision as a standard practice, with some simply following family traditions without considering the religious implications. However, in recent decades, there has been a noticeable shift in how people approach circumcision, particularly in Western societies. Some parents are beginning to question whether circumcision is truly necessary, especially when there is no specific medical or religious reason to do so. For these parents, the decision to circumcise often hinges on weighing the perceived health benefits against the ethical concerns of performing a permanent procedure on a child who cannot consent. Do parents have the right to make irreversible decisions about their child's body? Or should we wait until children are old enough to make their own informed choices? Where do you think the line should be drawn? Let me know in the comments. This growing awareness has led to a decline in circumcision rates in some parts of the world, particularly in Europe, where circumcision is less common and often viewed as unnecessary unless there are clear medical or religious reasons. What about you? Do you think circumcision should be based on cultural norms, or should parents only opt for it if there is a clear religious or medical justification? This topic is evolving, and I'd love to hear what you think about this cultural shift. The impact of circumcision on identity and belonging. One of the most powerful aspects of circumcision, particularly in religious contexts, is its role in shaping a person's identity and sense of belonging. For Jewish and Muslim boys, circumcision is more than just a physical procedure. It's a marker of their connection to a rich spiritual heritage and their place within a larger religious community. In Islam, circumcision is viewed as a way to honor the sunnah of their prophet Abraham and to affirm one's connection to the broader ummah, or global Muslim community. While the timing and cultural practices surrounding circumcision vary across different Islamic cultures, the spiritual and communal significance remains a constant theme. However, as societies become more diverse and pluralistic, questions about identity and belonging through circumcision have become more complex. In secular contexts, some individuals may feel disconnected from the religious or cultural traditions of circumcision, choosing instead to identify with more modern values of bodily autonomy and personal freedom. Others may struggle with balancing their cultural or religious heritage with the ethical concerns raised by modern debates on circumcision. How do you see circumcision influencing a person's sense of identity and belonging in today's world? Does it still hold the same weight in shaping religious or cultural identity, or has its meaning changed over time? I'd love to hear your perspectives. Drop your thoughts in the comments, and let's discuss how identity and tradition are evolving. Modern ethical discussions. Where do we go from here? As we've explored throughout this discussion, circumcision is a complex issue that touches on religion, culture, health, ethics, and personal choice. While its significance in religious traditions like Judaism and Islam remains strong, modern ethical debates have raised important questions about consent, bodily autonomy, and the role of tradition in today's world. At the heart of the ethical debate is the issue of informed consent. Many critics of routine infant circumcision argue that the procedure should be postponed until the individual is old enough to make their own informed decision. This argument is rooted in the belief that every person has the right to decide what happens to their own body and that parents should not impose irreversible procedures on their children without clear medical necessity. On the other hand, those who support circumcision, particularly in religious contexts, argue that parents have the right and responsibility to make decisions that align with their faith and cultural values. For many, circumcision is seen as an essential part of their religious identity, and delaying it could mean missing out on important spiritual milestones. This raises a crucial question for us to consider. How do we balance the rights of the individual with the rights of parents and religious communities? In a world where personal freedoms are increasingly valued, is there room to continue practices that have been passed down for generations? Let's engage in a thoughtful discussion about where we go from here. The future of circumcision in a changing world. As societies continue to evolve and become more globalized, the future of circumcision will likely be shaped by a range of factors, including religious traditions, cultural norms, medical research, and ethical considerations. It's possible that circumcision will remain a deeply important practice in some communities, while becoming less common or reinterpreted in others. Should circumcision be illegal for children who cannot give consent except in cases of medical necessity? Would a law like this be a violation of religious freedom, or is it time to prioritize human rights? For example, in secular societies where individual rights and bodily autonomy are prioritized, we may see an increasing number of parents choosing to forego circumcision in favor of allowing their children to make the decision for themselves later in life. On the other hand, religious communities that place a high value on tradition may continue to uphold circumcision as an essential rite of passage, ensuring that it remains a part of their spiritual and cultural identity. Whatever the future holds, one thing is certain: the conversation around circumcision is far from over. As more people become aware of the ethical, medical, and cultural dimensions of circumcision, the decision to circumcise will continue to be a deeply personal and often complex one. Could circumcision in places like the US be more about money than about health or tradition? Is the medical industry profiting off a practice that may no longer be necessary? Share your predictions in the comments below, and let's keep the conversation going. A closer look at personal choice and autonomy. As we explore the modern perspectives on circumcision, one of the most important topics to consider is the increasing emphasis on personal autonomy. With today's focus on individual rights and bodily integrity, many people believe that decisions regarding circumcision should ultimately lie with the person who will live with the consequences of that decision. In this view, circumcision, like other permanent or body-altering procedures, should be postponed until a person is old enough to make their own informed choice. Advocates of this perspective argue that bodily autonomy is a fundamental human right, and that non-medical circumcision of infants violates this principle. This idea is especially strong in secular and human rights communities, where there is a growing movement to protect children from undergoing irreversible procedures until they can provide informed consent. For parents who value bodily autonomy, the question of circumcision can be challenging. While some parents may want to follow religious or cultural traditions, others may feel conflicted about making such a significant decision on behalf of their child without their input. This leads us to a key question. Should parents prioritize the individual rights of their child over traditional or cultural expectations? Or do religious and cultural practices provide enough justification for making this decision on behalf of the child? It's a complex question, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it in the comments. At the intersection of these debates lies a broader issue: the tension between religious freedom and human rights. This is especially relevant in countries with diverse populations, where different religious and cultural practices coexist with modern legal frameworks that emphasize individual rights. For many religious communities, circumcision is not just a personal or family decision, it's a matter of spiritual identity and religious duty. In Judaism, for example, circumcision is considered a direct commandment from God, and not performing it could mean excluding a male child from the covenant. Similarly, in Islam, while circumcision is not obligatory according to Islamic law, it is widely regarded as an important religious tradition that connects Muslim men to their faith. But what happens when religious practices come into conflict with modern human rights principles? Some argue that in a pluralistic society, religious freedom should allow communities to continue their practices without interference from the state. Others contend that certain practices, especially those involving irreversible changes to a person's body, should be subject to human rights protections, even if that means limiting religious freedom in some cases. This brings us to another important question. Should the state have the right to regulate religious practices like circumcision in the name of protecting human rights? Or should religious communities be free to continue their traditions without interference? This is a debate that has emerged in countries like Germany and Denmark, where lawmakers have considered legislation to limit non-medical circumcision. Let's dive deeper into this complex issue. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Another important factor shaping the future of circumcision is the role of health organizations in their recommendations. Over the past few decades, numerous health bodies, including the World Health Organization, WHO, and the American Academy of Pediatrics, AAP, have weighed in on the health benefits and risks associated with circumcision. In particular, the WHO has promoted circumcision as part of its HIV prevention efforts in certain high-risk areas, particularly in parts of sub-Saharan Africa. Studies have shown that circumcision can reduce the risk of heterosexual transmission of HIV by up to 60%, which has led to widespread circumcision campaigns in countries with high rates of HIV infection. However, despite these public health campaigns, health organizations in other parts of the world, including Europe, have been more cautious about recommending routine circumcision. In places where HIV transmission rates are lower and where hygiene and access to healthcare are more widely available, health professionals may emphasize that the medical benefits of circumcision are not substantial enough to warrant routine practice. This divergence in recommendations has led to a patchwork of different policies around the world. In countries like the United States, where circumcision has been widely practiced for generations, many health organizations continue to support the practice for its health benefits. In contrast, many European countries see circumcision as an unnecessary medical intervention and do not recommend it unless there is a specific medical reason. This raises another question for us to explore. Should public health organizations have a larger role in influencing the decision to circumcise, especially when health benefits are at stake? Or should the decision remain a deeply personal one for families to make, regardless of medical recommendations? Let's continue this discussion in the comments and explore how health policy and personal choice intersect. Circumcision in a global context, a diverse world of practices. As we've seen, circumcision is practiced in many parts of the world for a variety of reasons: religious, cultural, and medical. But it's important to remember that the way circumcision is viewed and practiced can vary widely from one culture or region to another. In Jewish and Muslim communities, circumcision is deeply tied to religious traditions and is seen as a rite of passage or a fulfillment of a divine command. In contrast, many people in secular or Christian-majority countries may view circumcision as either a cultural norm or a medical choice, depending on their family traditions and societal influences. Interestingly, there are also places where circumcision is relatively rare. In parts of Europe and Latin America, for example, circumcision rates are much lower than in countries like the United States or regions with strong Jewish or Muslim populations. In these areas, circumcision may be viewed as an unusual or unnecessary procedure, with many people opting not to circumcise unless there is a clear medical need. At the same time, circumcision is sometimes practiced in cultures without strong religious mandates, often as part of broader initiation rites. For example, in some African tribes, circumcision is a key element of traditional ceremonies that mark the transition from childhood to adulthood. These rites are often accompanied by teachings about social responsibilities, morality, and the role of the individual within the community. This global diversity in circumcision practices highlights how differently the procedure is understood and valued in various cultural contexts. It also shows that the decision to circumcise can be influenced by a wide range of factors, from religious beliefs to cultural identity to health concerns. How do you see the global differences in circumcision practices affecting how we understand the procedure today? Should we take a more global perspective when discussing circumcision, or are personal and cultural factors more important? Let's continue this exploration in the comments below. Wrapping up the ongoing conversation around circumcision. As we come to the end of this deep dive into circumcision, we've seen just how complex and multifaceted this issue really is. Whether it's viewed through a religious, cultural, medical, or ethical lens, circumcision touches on some of the most important aspects of identity, personal choice, and tradition. For some, circumcision is a sacred religious ritual, a way to connect with their faith and fulfill the covenant made with Abraham thousands of years ago. For others, it's a personal health decision, informed by medical research and public health recommendations. And for still others, it's a matter of bodily autonomy and human rights, with a growing movement advocating for the right to choose what happens to one's own body. Wherever you stand on the issue, one thing is clear: the conversation around circumcision is far from over. As our understanding of health, ethics, and human rights continues to evolve, so too will the ways in which we think about circumcision and its role in our lives. The role of tradition in the modern world. For many people, the religious and cultural significance of circumcision will continue to play a central role in their decision-making. In Jewish and Muslim communities, for example, circumcision is a core practice that ties the present generation to their ancestors and to the covenant between Abraham and God. As long as these traditions remain vital to religious identity, it is likely that circumcision will continue to be practiced in these communities. However, modernity brings new challenges. In increasingly secular societies, where faith traditions may not carry as much weight, the meaning of circumcision could shift. As families become more diverse in their beliefs, and as human rights and ethical debates continue to grow, more parents may choose to forego circumcision, or at least delay it until their child can make an informed decision. This potential shift is already visible in many parts of Europe and Australia, where circumcision rates have declined, and the practice is seen less as a religious imperative and more as a matter of personal choice. In these contexts, the focus on bodily autonomy and individual rights could reshape how future generations think about circumcision. Do you think tradition will continue to play a significant role in decisions around circumcision? Or will individual rights and autonomy take precedence? It's an evolving conversation. Let's keep exploring this in the comments below. A final reflection: tradition, choice, and the future of circumcision. In closing, we've journeyed through the rich history, diverse practices, and complex ethical debates surrounding circumcision. From its origins as a covenant between God and Abraham, to its role in modern healthcare and cultural identity, circumcision has remained a deeply significant practice across various parts of the world. Yet, as we've seen, the decision to circumcise is far from straightforward. For some, it is a sacred obligation, a way to connect with faith, culture, and family. For others, it is a medical decision, shaped by health concerns and public health recommendations. And for many, it is increasingly becoming a matter of personal autonomy, where the rights of the individual are placed above tradition. As we look to the future, the conversation around circumcision will likely continue to evolve. New generations will face the same questions of faith, health, and ethics that have shaped this practice for millennia. But with growing awareness of personal rights and the diverse views held across different cultures, the decision to circumcise will remain a deeply personal and often complex one. What's your final take on circumcision? Whether you're reflecting on the religious significance, the medical considerations, or the ethical debates, I want to hear your thoughts. Let's continue the conversation in the comments, and thank you for joining me on this thoughtful exploration of one of the world's most enduring practices. I hope this video gave you a comprehensive understanding of circumcision from multiple angles: religious, cultural, ethical, and medical. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on more thought-provoking discussions. And don't forget to leave your comments below. Your voice is an important part of this conversation. Until next time, take care and keep exploring these important questions with an open mind.